Good morning, Dr. Saunders. I'm so glad that you said yes to this.
Good morning. Delighted to be here.
As you know, as I explained to you on an email, this was a complete shot in the dark. We've been doing these COVID talks, one on self-care, one on nutrition, one on science, economy, COVID in developing countries, and the next had to be someone in the area of psychology. And I think you and I are going to become friends. I can tell. But it was a shot in the dark, so I'm very glad that you replied to that very humble email I tried to send you.
Good. Yes.
When we had the one on the COVID talk on the economy, one of the most fascinating responses from my friend, the World Bank economist, Marcelo Giugale, when I asked him what kind of economist he was, and it was a fascinating answer, actually. So I would ask you the same thing. What kind of a psychologist are you?
I am a clinical psychologist, so I'm an academic. I'm at Marquette University in Milwaukee. I am a professor of psychology, and I'm the chairperson there. My training background is as a clinical psychologist, so we sort of talk about clinical psychology and experimental psychology, or psychologists. And experimental psychologists, they're people who study the brain, study social issues, study personality, study how children develop, and they use experimental methods, and not really involved in trying to change things so much as to understand them. Clinical psychology is the other sort of half of psychology, clinical and experimental. Clinical psychologists use experimental methods, but we are also trained. Experimental psychologists are not. Clinical psychologists are trained in the evaluation and the diagnosis and the treatment of persons with mental health problems, persons and families and couples and groups and etc. And so I'm a clinical psychologist by background. My specialty is in the understanding and the treatment of especially depression and anxiety, and have a particular research interest. Again, I'm an academic, and I have a particular research interest in the stigma of mental illness, stigma surrounding mental illness. The fact that people feel they might be experiencing depression, which is bad, but they also are embarrassed or ashamed of themselves for being depressed or anxious or having a trauma-related problem or whatever. There's no other illness I can think of that people are blamed for. There's somehow, if I'm depressed, that's because I'm weak, or because God is punishing me, or because there's something wrong with me. So those are examples of the stigma of mental illness. And so that's what I study, which is how people, just a couple other kind of brief facts. 1 out of 5 persons in any one point in time. Right now, there's about 20% rate of mental illness across the world. And so if you have a church of 500 people, 500 people sitting in the pews, 100 people will have some form of mental illness right in front of you.
Full disclosure, I have no problem in letting you know and let our people know that I was diagnosed with clinical depression, and you use the word weak. I don't think anybody who knows me would call me weak. They will call me many things.
Yeah.
It runs in my family, and I have I've been telling people what you just said, that it's probably the only illness that we blame the person. But
yeah, we blame the person, and yet it's so common. I mean, 1 in 5 persons, all of those people have family members. Many of them are married, they have children. So what I like to say is, you might not know who among your friends or among your parishioners has a mental illness, but that's just because they haven't told you. It's not that they're not out there. They are out there. There's 20%. And because of the stigma, a lot of them don't get the help that they should need. If I break my arm, I'm going to go to the doctor and have them set it. If I get a toothache, I'm going to go to the dentist and say, hey, my tooth has been hurting for a long time. But a lot of people with depression and anxiety and other mental illnesses, because they feel ashamed that there's something wrong with them, that they have this, they compound the problem with shame. They don't want to maybe tell others about it. They want to keep it to themselves, so they suffer in silence. And if they are fortunate, they will turn to people like their priest, like their pastor, like their someone in their church. And so I think priests and pastors and clergy in general are frontline people. You're the ones that marry their children and bury their parents and proclaim the good news of salvation to them. Of course, they're going to turn to you when someone is experiencing sadness. And I actually I have a 2-volume set called A Christian Guide to Mental Illness, to encourage to help clergy understand the prevalence of mental illness, how common it is, and to understand what it looks like and how they can help. As
we priests say, you are preaching to the choir. And I'm worried that priests would do any kind of intervention without the proper training. So I think you and I will advocate for that also.
Yes, yeah.
Dr. Saunders, in the present situation, we are on month 2.5 of this pandemic, the shutdown. I'm sure I don't need to ask you many questions. You know what the normal questions are. What would you say at this point from your perspective?
The pandemic and what has been required to try to get it under control, which is to avoid other people. And of course, on top of that, when you say don't leave your home, avoid other people, businesses have been destroyed. We have 1 out of 6 persons that are unemployed now. Many of them recently lost their jobs. They don't know how they're going to pay for their rent or their mortgage or their car payments. They don't know if their kids can go back to college when they need them to be working, although there's no jobs to find. This is an extraordinarily stressful situation, compounded by the problem that we cannot go outside or meet with friends and talk with other people, interact with other people. Human beings are extremely social people. People are extremely social beings, is maybe a better way to put it. We feel better when we're able to talk with friends and meet with friends and see friends, and this is great. Doing this by Zoom is wonderful, but it's nothing. It's half, I would say. It's a third as enjoyable as it would be when we finally do get to meet face to face, person to person. Screen to screen is just not quite enough, although I recommend it. It's better than nothing. But the pandemic has caused just a huge spike in mental health problems across the country. Just think about little kids, for example, elementary school children, unable to see their friends, unable to leave their house, unable to go outside and play, for example, play with their friends because of the fear of this virus. It's, they're suffering as well. So the pandemic, has killed many, many people, and it has created a huge problem of mental health issues. Not just, so people who are prone to mental illness, depression, anxiety, drinking too much, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, all of the stress of this has made those people even more likely to experience a increase in severity or relapse into the illness. But we also have brand new cases that are being created. People who weren't depressed are now depressed. People who weren't anxious are now anxious. People who weren't drinking too much are now drinking too much, and so forth. And we see this with every sort of disaster. that this happens. It's just that this disaster, a hurricane hits New York, it's, which happened I think in the 80s, maybe the 70s. That was a one-day thing and, weeks of cleaning up. This has been, as you said, 2.5 months and no end in sight. And it's a really, as dangerous as bad as things are physically for people, they're maybe even worse mentally, emotionally for people. So it's a real concern.
One of the feelings I have experienced myself, and I'm very open about with my parishioners about I tell them at the beginning of Mass every day that we are live streaming, I tell them what my mood is, 6/10, 8/10. Mm-hmm. I have found myself more irritable. Mm-hmm. And is that normal?
I think it's absolutely normal. Irritability, the feeling of irritability. So one question would be, is this because of the lack of social interaction? And the short answer is absolutely yes. The way that we avoid becoming irritable is I say to my coworker, I had this meeting and, this person was, talking like this, and I felt like I was being treated unfairly, and I'm not sure what to do about it. And that person that I'm talking to nods and smiles and says, wow, that's a terrible experience. And I've just gotten rid of that sort of tension inside myself related to that unpleasant experience. And then happens again, and it happens again, and it happens again. And throughout the day, I'm letting go. By talking about it, I'm letting go of the things that are bothering me. If I don't have that opportunity, because I'm not surrounded by people as I usually am, if I don't have that opportunity to go and talk with someone, to complain, to resolve a disagreement, if I have a disagreement with a colleague in my department, I walk down the hall. And if they're in their office, I walk in their office and I sit down and I say, hey, let's, I think we're disagreeing. And, but if we don't have the chance to sort of discharge a little bit here, a little bit there, a little bit here, a little bit there, instead it's like a pressure cooker. You got the lid on the pressure cooker, and instead of letting off a little steam ever so often, it's all just staying inside. And then, gosh, I'm feeling so tense all the time. It's because you're not letting off that steam a little bit at a time, which is really important to do, but it's hard to do when there's no one around to do it with. So absolutely normal. Same thing with depression, same thing with anxiety. Think about anxiety kind of briefly. How do you reassure yourself if you're anxious? I have a conversation with, the dean at Marquette, and I'm anxious that it didn't go well, that she got the wrong idea, that I've made a bad impression. And I talked to a colleague, and my colleague says, no, I know the dean and she likes you quite a bit. Suddenly my anxiety is much less. If I don't have the chance to talk to someone about what's making me anxious, every parent out there, a child is afraid of a dog. You say, no, it's a friendly dog. Look, you talk the child into a new way of thinking, and that, we check our thinking with other people. A very important principle in psychology is the way we think determines how we feel. Mm-hmm. And if we don't have the opportunity to check how we're thinking depressing thoughts, we're thinking anxious thoughts, we're thinking, irritable thoughts, unless we have the opportunity to talk with others, and that you talk what you're thinking, and they say, no, I'm not sure that's right. No, people do like you. No, she does like you. No, that person is actually nice. I think you get the wrong impression of her. Then we realize, we're not thinking necessarily correctly. Change our thinking, feel less depressed and anxious and irritable. Absolutely normal, but if you can't do that as much, you're going to feel more.
I like that you said the way you think is the way you feel, and then we say the way you feel is the way you act. That has been part of many homilies in this place. So hopefully some parishioners may remember. I have heard also that this from economists and from sociologists, from political science people, that this time has been a great laboratory, like a great lab on an opportunity for professionals to study human behavior. Do you feel this way about this situation? What would an academic person like you, do you look at this as a situation that will help people in your profession to learn a lot?
I think so. You know, in the typical experiment, we have, you know, think about the experiments or the research that they're trying to do to develop drugs that will help people who are sick. In the typical experiment, what you do is you find a bunch of people and you give some of them the drug and you give others a placebo. You have the experimental condition and you have what's called the control condition. You have two different conditions, and then you watch what happens to those people over time. And the folks that get the drug, they get better faster than those who don't get the drug. Now we have evidence that the drug helps. Or the people who get the drug get no better, no faster than those who don't get the drug. Now we know that the drug did not make a difference. Think about what's happening around the world, which is we have some countries doing this, other countries doing that. Within our own United States, we have some states doing this, some states doing that. Some people experiencing this, some people experiencing that. And now we have the opportunity to see, well, what were those different, what were the effects of these different conditions? So it's you know, in studying a drug, it's a very purposeful experiment where you either this or that with a group of people that you've recruited. Here we have, it's more of a natural experiment, but it's happening around the world. We can compare what happened in Sweden to what happened in Norway, because they had two different attitudes or two different types of regulations and rules related to this illness. And so it's a wonderful opportunity for, there's going to be decades probably of research coming out of this experiences that we've had, including psychological research. I mean, there's someone out there right now, I don't know who they are, someone out there right now is studying the effects of not being able to go to school on first graders versus fourth graders versus eighth graders. There's someone studying the effects of not being able to celebrate graduation for seniors, for not being able to go to prom. You know, that, you know, we are faced with a very, you know, with unique situation that is been sort of, you know, unintentionally created. All of these differences between people, and it's going to show us a lot what happens if you can do this. You know, there's no way we could have gotten permission to keep 10 million kids from going to school. You know, no research is going to be able to get permission to do that. Well, that's what happened though, but it happened naturally. It happened as a result of what we're facing. And now there's an opportunity to, and we're going to, what everyone's expecting is that these kids, I kind of implied this earlier, the kids that weren't able to go to school are going to be, you know, they're going to suffer higher rates of anxiety and depression and social problems because of that lack of ability to do that, because of they weren't, you know, we couldn't allow them to go to school out of fears for their safety, for their health.
Would you have advice to parents or grandparents from your perspective again, on what can they do to maybe soften the consequences of this lack of social interaction with other children? Or
I think, you know, early on I had the expression, social distancing is not the same as social isolation. And, you know, and so we have to make sure that kids are not socially isolating. What that means, given that we have to engage in social distancing, is that, you know, you put a mask on them, and if you're going to take them outside, but take them outside as much as possible. Get them online doing this type of thing, interacting face to face, screen to screen with other kids, with other families, with their cousins, with whoever. Play games online as much as possible. Do it, screen to screen, face to face versus only voice to voice. But a big difference though is you don't have to plan for a child. So it's summer now. We don't really have to plan that a child is going to go find a friend. You just kick them outside. It's a nice day. Go outside. And they go outside, and there's other kids outside, and they spontaneously start to play. Can't do that now necessarily, so we have to be much more planful about social interactions, such as social interactions online. And one of the things that we're observing is that kids are doing this on their own. Kids are going online more than ever. Is that good? Well, it's good in the sense that they need the social interaction. What's going to be the long-term effect? Are they going to prefer, video to actual, personal contact? Let's hope not. But I'm impressed that so many children are just kind of naturally going to, sharing screen time with their friends and doing things online because they need that social interaction so much. Again,
Say something about grandparents, because part of our congregation would be happy. Many of our people, some of our people are grandparents. What can you do to help their grandchildren and their adult children with this situation?
What can grandparents do? I think, probably, the grandparents, being older, 50, 60, 70, that's the group that's at highest risk for probably both contracting and having serious consequences of contracting COVID-19. So while being careful, keeping as much contact as possible with your kids and your grandkids, probably that means, figuring out technology that you hadn't had to figure out before, how to use what we're using now, which is Zoom, how to use other types of technology to do this face-to-face stuff. Maybe learn how to play game online. If you like to play checkers and you want to teach your grandson how to play checkers, my grandfather taught me how to play checkers. He never let me win. I think I remember beating him once when I was in high school, and he was so proud of me, Grandpa Roy. There's ways to, for grandparents, I would say be proactive in trying to connect with your grandkids, maybe with your adult kids as well. So maybe say, hey, I'd like to play checkers with you, and I found out how to do this by Googling it. Took me a while to figure it out, but this is what I want you to do. It'd be so cool if a grandparent were telling a 8-year-old grandson how to play checkers online, and then you play with them and so forth. The other advice I give to grandparents is to really be okay with, anticipate and be okay with, and I'm thinking now more maybe your kids, your grown kids with their own kids, your grandkids, to realize how stressed they are. All my kids are grown. I'm waiting for grandkids. I'm 57. All my kids are grown, out of the house. I haven't had nearly as much stress related to this situation as have my colleagues with little kids in the home. Mm-hmm. And I feel very badly for them. And All I can do is tell them, yeah, I understand, but it's, back to this whole study thing, this experiment, natural experiments, we're all forced to stay at home. It's been really hard it's been especially hard for my colleagues with younger children, school-age children, trying to keep up with their own work while helping their kids keep up with their schoolwork. So for you grandparents to reach out to your adult children and just express support, express sympathy. Empathy means understanding how they're thinking and feeling. Don't take the attitude, oh, you shouldn't feel so bad or you shouldn't be so stressed out. Rather, understand, offer support, emotional support. It doesn't have to be financial or physical, and doing things for them. Just telling them that you understand and that this is a terrible situation and that hopefully it will end soon, and hang in there. And of course you're upset and sad. It's so easy for a parent to say to a child, including an adult child, please don't feel so bad. Take the attitude, you shouldn't feel so bad. Instead, I always encourage people to say, oh, of course you feel bad. I'm so sorry you feel bad. I wish there was something I could do to not make you feel bad. That in and of itself actually helps. Telling them not to feel bad or they shouldn't feel bad makes them feel worse.
And then they say that academic people cannot give proper and practical advice to people. Doctor, you did very well. I have another question that you made me think of with one of your answers. Again, referring to this global laboratory, and you said somebody may be studying the effect with first graders compared to fourth graders. Is you or the department you chair choosing one area, or you think you will be choosing an area of work, or that's not how it works?
In academics, we tend to, the joke that academics don't often give practical advice, that's actually probably true. And part of the reason of that is that we tend to focus pretty narrow. I have a colleague who focuses on racism, which is a huge problem, but it's kind of a narrow focus compared to, the whole broad area that psychologists study. Again, we study child development, we study social interactions. A couple of my colleagues study the brain. And so academics will really focus on their area and how COVID-19, how this pandemic has affected people that they study within their subspecialty. So, for example, at UW Milwaukee, I have colleagues there that study depression. They're going to study how COVID-19 affects the rate of depression. I have a colleague at Children's Hospital of Wisconsin. She's going to study how COVID-19 has affected children's diabetes control. I have a colleague at Medical College of Wisconsin. She's going to study the effects of COVID-19 on people seeking treatment for trauma. Another colleague studies domestic abuse. He's going to study how COVID-19 has affected the rates of domestic abuse, and so forth and so on. So each of us will study within our own area. My biology colleagues, those in biological sciences or chemistry, they have probably different areas that they'll study this disease from. We have a lot of chemists around the country working very hard to develop drugs for this particular one. So it certainly does affect, but even within our department, within a small department in an academic institution, there will be wide variability in who studies what, depending on what they've kind of always studied. So
three final questions, because I'm abusing your time. Is there a silver lining in all this? We have asked this from all the speakers. Anything that has been a silver lining for you Dr. Stephen Saunders personally on this situation?
You know, the silver lining, I think we're going to see a lot of changes in probably almost every aspect of life. I think, you know, higher education, that's what I am. I'm at college. I teach at a university I have for 25 years now. And higher education, college education is being transformed. We have had to learn quickly, starting in mid-March, I guess. It was right about spring break. Actually, it was exactly spring break when it was decided at a lot of colleges around the country, students can't come back. There's just too dense. Students and faculty are too densely populated on college campuses, and it's just unsafe. And so the students were told to stay home, and we had to quickly switch to online teaching. I think the future of teaching will be a really good mix of online and face-to-face. It's unfortunate that we're not able to do much face-to-face as much as we should do. But really, colleges have been, not all, but probably the vast majority of colleges have been very slow to adopt to technology and technological capacities to help to educate students. And I think the silver lining is we're all kind of being forced to use technology and to realizing that there's a lot of useful things to use with this type of technology. So that's one.
Yeah. Okay, I don't think you are easily intimidated by a priest, so you're doing great.
Okay.
Be honest with me, is there something, that's the last question, something I should have asked that I didn't?
Not that I can think of. I mean, we talked briefly about, so you mentioned briefly, and I think you and I will collaborate about this in the future. I hope we will. Can't wait to meet face to face. But you know, one of the things that I like to point out to clergy, maybe especially, but also lay persons, mental health care is extremely effective. There are mental health professionals like me. They have degrees, master's degrees at least in social work and counseling. They have doctoral degrees in clinical psychology and psychiatry.
You know what my parishioners are thinking? When they see you saying this, that you don't know what you are getting into.
Yeah.
Hitting me, you will see what will happen.
Yeah.
I feel that what you are saying, and you said that in the first interaction we had by email, I've been looking for a person like you because I am very concerned about mental health in general.
Yeah.
And people are looking at this interview and they're saying,
don't go there.
This poor academic person doesn't know how much we are going to do. I feel very strongly.
Yeah, but I would encourage people to realize that first, clergy, as a general rule, I would say clergy, just like any lay person who is not a mental health professional, can provide mental health first aid. If you see someone who's feeling down, say, hey, let's go out for coffee. Hey, make sure you get sleep. Hey, make sure you're eating right. Hey, if you're isolating yourself, don't do that. That's mental health first aid. That's like putting a Band-Aid on a child's cut arm. But don't mistake the capacity for doing that. Don't mistake the fact that you like people and want to help people, you and all your colleagues who are clergy, with being able to provide professional mental health care.
You are preaching to the choir. Yeah. I mean, and I said that in my immediate email right away. I'm very thankful. I also feel not vindicated, but one of the things we did here at the Perrys immediately was an evening chat that I ran. I host 5 days a week, and then a parishioner does one more night so I can get a night off. But I didn't have the psychological background to know that was a good thing to do. So we've connected everybody every evening at 6:30 for half an hour.
Yeah.
It's Facebook Live, so only I get to speak, which is not. Yeah. But at least it had brought people together. I'm very happy that you said that's one of the things that we could do. So I feel that it was an intuition, but I'm glad that it seems to be a good one. Anything else? Would you? One thing that people ask me: would you recommend as a book?
Just for pleasure or for this purpose?
For this purpose, in that people like me, like my parishioners could read now. They always ask me for book recommendations in this area of your work that would be useful for us at this time.
Yeah, I have a 2-volume set that is published by Northwestern Publishing House, which is Wisconsin Lutheran Synod, called A Christian Guide to Mental Illness. It's pretty long. It's well written, if I might say so, but it talks about these in great detail. I would, also, I'm a big fan of Martin Luther's writing, from the 16th century, because he wrote a lot about about how people should deal with what was called back then melancholia, what we now call depression. And he said basically, look, the world's a tough place, and don't think you just because you're depressed that there's something wrong with you. Just because you're stressed out, there's something wrong with you. And you think about, they had the Black Plague, they had the peasant revolts, they had near constant warfare. Those are the Dark Ages, just right after the Dark Ages. So we're in our own Dark Age now. I think his consolation is really, really important. Beyond that, I think read books for pleasure. Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings are some of my favorites. Just, as much as possible, try to find enjoyment with others, especially with others. And, we'll get through this, and we'll get through to the other side, and you and I will meet face to face eventually, maybe sooner than later.
I'm very glad you recommended Martin Luther to a Catholic priest. So that's fantastic. I think that's great. I think he would be Catholic today. He's the I think I'm ecumenical enough to understand that many of the things he said that broke the church in two. This is what the church did after the Second Vatican, what the Catholic Church did after the Second Vatican Council. So it's a very interesting point that you made there. So but I wanted to make sure that my parishioners would not have a heart attack. The pastor is saying that Martin Luther, yes, there was this division in the church, but the church after the Second Vatican Council took over many of the things he says. With this. I'm very excited about the future. Very happy that you had time for this. Hopefully you are happy with the interview.
Yes, it was very great fun.
Hopefully we can just not edit much. I'm not going to cut anything. Maybe add some statistics if that's okay with you.
Sure.
We are going to show this on Sunday.
Sounds great.
Excellent.
Sounds great.
Thank you very much.
I look forward to seeing you.
Saunders. Sure.
Yes. Yeah.
See you soon.
Thanks, Father. Bye.
Thank you.